How to protect insecure embedded systems. This chapter about printers. After this presentation, you're never going to look at your printer the same way. Hi, I'm Professor Stolfo, Computer Science Department at Columbia University. This is the Intrusion Detection Systems Lab. Ang Sui, Senior Graduate Research Assistant. This is his primary area of research, security of embedded systems. Jonathan Voris, also a member of the IDS Lab, postdoc visiting us for this year. And this presentation is about a very serious and significant vulnerability that we've discovered in HP printer firmware. Printers, like any other embedded device, have computers inside them and run software. And software can be vulnerable, and we're about to announce a zero-day vulnerability. Most work in security is devoted to servers, hosts, antivirus software, intrusion detection systems on the network, protecting mobile devices, protecting the cloud. And what's often ignored are the embedded systems that are pervasive throughout the internet. Embedded systems include routers, VoIP phones, webcams, even digital thermostats that are managed, and energy systems. And that printer sitting next to your PC is also an embedded device. The firmware that runs in HP printers has a significant vulnerability, and we're going to demonstrate the exploitation of that vulnerability and the implications of the malware that can be injected into the printer firmware. I should mention parenthetically, which I'll describe in a short while, this is also an opportunity to turn printers into security devices. That's the line of work that we're doing as part of a number of funded research programs that I'll explain and describe later in this video. I'm going to hand it over to Ang now to describe to you the network setup and demonstrate the vulnerability and its implications.
All right, so before we demonstrate the actual vulnerability and the demos that you're going to see, let's first talk about the network topology we have here. Now, on this side of the table, everything on this table represents your typical secure private network. Here is a router that's acting as my perimeter firewall. Behind the firewall, we have your typical layer 2, layer 3 distribution network. And behind that, we have various workstations and a printer. Now, this red cable here represents the internet. On this table here, we have another printer outside of the secure private network and a attack laptop that's somewhere out on the internet. So we're going to now show you the first demo, which will stealthily exfiltrate information that's printed on the secure printer to this printer somewhere out on the internet. Okay, now for our first demo, I'm going to show this compromised printer exfiltrating information, everything that's printed to it, to another printer out on the internet. Now John is behind our secure private network. He is now going to send to this printer his tax return. And as soon as this printer starts printing, this other printer on the internet also prints the identical document. Okay? And as the second part of this demo, we actually also exfiltrate, or we find personal information that is interesting, and we automatically filter that out and we tweet it on Twitter. And you can see this on my phone. So what you see here is the social security number that is inside the tax return PDF document that was printed and exfiltrated. All right, so for our second demo, I'm going to show how a compromised printer can be used as a stealthy launching off point for further reconnaissance and exploitation within the private secure network. Now you're going to see a screen dump of the whole thing happening, but before we see that, I'm going to show you or explain to you exactly what's happening here. Now, this compromised printer, as soon as it boots up, will make an outbound TCP connection to my attack laptop out on the internet. We're doing this because I cannot actually gain access to the internal network because this firewall here blocks all incoming TCP connections. Once this happens, the attack laptop is going to be used to instruct this printer to make a second TCP connection to this vulnerable Windows XP desktop. Now, once this happens, I can then use this IP tunnel to instruct my laptop to send a exploit and shellcode to this machine, which will allow me to get root access to this computer over here. And once that happens, the shellcode will then make a second connection out to the internet, back to my laptop, to give me root shell on this computer behind the secure private network and behind this firewall. Now that you've seen our demos of what can be done with a compromised printer, I'm going to show you how we actually accomplish this. I crafted a special file which includes some legitimate document, followed by a specially crafted firmware update for this particular printer, which includes our stealthy rootkit, exfiltration capability, and reverse IP proxy. Now, all I have to do to infect a printer with this malware is to simply print the document to the vulnerable printer here. So once the document is sent to the printer, all you'll see is that a file begins to print, and immediately after that, the printer enters firmware update mode.
So as we said in the beginning, this line of research, this line of work is devoted to the insecurity of embedded systems, to make everyone aware of the dangers, the implications, and to develop solutions to these problems and mitigation strategies for them. This work started by looking at printers as a device that could harbor malicious software that could do very bad damage, physical damage, for example. So we attempted to develop malicious software that would make the printer burn. I can't think of a better way of demonstrating the vulnerabilities that are inherent in printers. This is the best that could be achieved. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending upon your point of view, there's a thermal switch in the printers that shuts them off when they get too hot, and so the paper only browned rather than burned. Then, however, looking at what was achieved, it became crystal clear that the problem is far worse than just burning paper or burning printers. The mitigation strategy for this very wide-scale threat, which should be crystal clear, because printers are everywhere and they're reachable through email-attached documents, through thumb drives, through downloads. Any perimeter defenses can be pierced because documents freely flow across perimeters, and documents that are printed to these devices can harbor firmware updates that are entirely stealthy and cannot be viewed. There's just no antivirus software available to stop this threat. The mitigation strategies are both technical mitigation as well as business policy and strategy mitigation strategies. Ang is going to describe several of the approaches, which is part of the research that we're doing in the lab. And then I'll talk a bit more about the future of this line of work.
So as far as mitigating this vulnerability, the first stage, stopgag mitigation, is pretty obvious. You have to filter off access to the printer at either the firewall level, at the spooler level, or the host level, or all three. But this doesn't actually address the fundamental vulnerability that we've discovered, which is core to the way HP printers process firmware updates. Now, currently, anyone who can print a document to the printer can actually upgrade the firmware in this way. And in fact, there's not a way to deactivate the RFU update in this manner through any legitimate administrative interface that we've seen. So in order to really mitigate this problem, we actually need to deactivate the vulnerable code inside the firmware, and we have to do this without help from HP currently. So this is part of the work that we're doing here, using software symbiotes to inject host-based defenses into proprietary black box embedded systems, and also to use the same structure to actually discover and deactivate potentially vulnerable attack surfaces in these proprietary firmwares.
So the ongoing research in the lab will continue looking at innovative ways to solve this fundamental problem, not just with printers. earlier work was devoted to studying routers and how they are also vulnerable, as are VoIP phones, as are webcams, as are any embedded system. The more we find, the more opportunity we see, because there's been no focus on the security, or very little focus on the security of these devices that we take for granted and that are ubiquitous, and that we carry into sensitive and secured environments every day without giving them a second thought. Now, the mitigation strategy is both technical and, as I said earlier, also business-oriented. And our next steps in this line of work is to approach HP and also Microsoft, who can play a role in the mitigation strategy to push out updates to the firmware in these printers, and there's a number of ways we can do it, in order to mitigate the strategy now. The research is crystal clear that the impact of this is very large. To get the large vendors to respond on a timely basis may need assistance from large organizations that are particularly vulnerable to this widespread vulnerability of embedded systems. And that's part of the ongoing work that we're doing in the lab and with our partners, with our research partners. I have to tie this up. Very important point. The embedded systems that are right next to your PC may be infected now. There are no host-based defenses or detectors for you to know that. These devices are completely open and available to be exploited.